Today, I'd like to continue talking about thinking deeply. And at some point, I want to get to an actual example of this, but I don't think we'll get to that today. Maybe part four. But for today, I'd like to go over what we have on this list. So let's start with making mistakes. So, point one, you will not be right, which is good. And I mean this actually both for thinking deeply and for what I'm going to discuss today, as well as generally how I try to run GTT. For those of you who have been watching for a long time, one of the things I really strive for is just being real in this world where there's so much Photoshop, there's so much editing, there's so much, I don't know, people not telling it straight. I feel like part of my job or my goal with GTT is to at least give people a place where they can see things in a real way, mistakes and all. And part of thinking deeply will likely take you down this path. I think it's super important that when you start to explore the thinking deeply philosophy, that you go in with the expectation that you're not going to get the perfect answer right away. And that's kind of part of the reason why you are thinking deeply is if it was such a simple problem, like what does peanut butter go with in the P&J sandwich? If it wasn't that really that simple, then you probably wouldn't need to think deeply anyway. So as you're exploring the space of thinking deeply, what I try to do is go in knowing that I may not get the answer right away, or if I think I have gotten the answer very quickly, but I know the problem is complicated, I try to avoid leaning in and stopping at that point. This also goes back to this notion of being directionally correct and trying to live a life where you're less focused about being right and you're more focused on growing rather than having an idea that just comes to you and then doubling and tripling and quadrupling down to everybody why that answer is right. Allow yourself the opportunity to consider that, yeah, this is kind of an interesting idea, but maybe there are other ideas. So you can jot this down, but then give yourself the freedom to brainstorm, to maybe suspect that the solution that you have maybe isn't perfect. Instead, maybe play devil's advocate. Think about the solution that you've come up with and then try to discover the reasons why it won't work. And again, do it with intellectual honesty, intellectual integrity, or what we often call scientific integrity, where you are openly stating the pros and the cons. What I also find too is the better you get at being able to clarify the reasons why some idea is good, as well as the reason why some idea is bad, the more likely that people will trust you. Because my experience has been highly intelligent people often know that there really generally isn't a silver bullet for almost anything. So if someone comes up to you and says, "This is the best thing ever, there really is nothing better than this," either they haven't thought about it enough, or maybe they're trying to sell you something. So try to avoid that. And instead, at least for me, I try to go into the deep thinking sessions, understanding that the first thing that comes to my mind is probably not going to be the answer. And I'll still write these things down. I'll make sure that I take rigorous notes, or I'll be recording myself, whatever I need to do. But I allow myself the opportunity to meander, to really kind of explore the space. I find just in general, this is not only a good practice for thinking deeply, but it tends to be a pretty good practice just in life. When you're talking with people, when you're sharing ideas, and being okay, I think, not having all the answers. That's, I think, a really good, important quality for being able to grow. And these deep thinking exercises really are meant to, in some sense, help you grow, help you learn things, or explore problems maybe in ways that you wouldn't have otherwise. So this is maybe the first point, the knowing that you're going to make mistakes. The second point that I want to share is that while I'm a strong believer that quality tends to be one of the most important things that we want to work toward, I want to share that quality, I think, is a process that is predicated by quantity. And what I mean by that is that in order to get really good at something, whatever that thing is, you generally have to put in the reps. You have to do it a lot. Even with this thinking deeply process, the first time you do it, maybe you're not going to be super great at it right out of the gate. Does that mean the process doesn't work? Maybe not. Maybe it actually means that there just is more to learn, and you need more practice for it to become truly effective for you. Just like learning how to play the piano or learning how to code, is that these are all skills, and skills generally require reps. And while my view is that quality is almost always more important than quantity, generally what I find is that in order to really get the quality that you need from something, you have to do it quite a bit. You need that quantity. So what am I trying to say here? Trying to say that for you to be able to put out that incredible album like the Beatles did, they did a huge amount of practice, huge amount of reps, their 10,000 hours, 100,000 hours before they recorded that first album. And so similarly, if you think that the first time you think deeply, or the first time that you do anything, you're going to be an expert at it, you're probably already setting yourself up for failure. So maybe don't have that mindset. Rather, have the mindset that this is going to be an experience, and this is going to require iterations. So I'm going to start today. I'm just going to practice, and it's probably not going to be super great, but then I'll try it again tomorrow or next week, and then I'll keep going. And then eventually what will happen is the quality will be there. So what I see a lot from highly intelligent people is this overthinking, spending too much time thinking about making sure that everything is exactly perfect. And while you might be able to do that for some cases, in order for you to, I think, really be as productive and achieve, I think, what maybe you're really capable of achieving, you'll likely have to work in circumstances that are not fully in your control. And that means all these different pieces that you want to be exactly right because you think that they're necessary, uh, you're going to have to forego those. And it doesn't mean don't try. It just means these are the circumstances. And we know that quality might be compromised here. But the goal here in this learning experience is that I'm going to put in those reps to slowly ramp up on the quality, and the quality will be a byproduct of something over time. Think of it as like spelling. The only really way that you get good at spelling is by trying to spell words. If you start with the mindset of, I'll spell everything perfectly every time I write a word, you probably are not going to write that many words. So be okay with the process taking a while, and knowing that even when you're going through the thinking deeply, that not every idea you're going to have is going to be perfect. And even the idea that you decide that you're going to lean into may not be perfect, but you can iterate, right? This is why we say think deeply and iterate. Is you may start out with 20 ideas, and then slowly you prune those, and then it becomes 10, and then it becomes 5, and then maybe at some point it becomes 3, and even those 3 aren't perfect, but then you refine them, you continue to iterate, and then slowly the quality starts to become apparent. So I wanted to share this with you. This I think is especially important in terms of developing new skills, like thinking deeply, rather than just maybe casting it aside because you had one bad experience with it and it didn't work out exactly right. Yeah, maybe give it a number of tries before you throw it to the wayside. As I think I've mentioned many times, I think I started and stopped trying. I think I tried to create Notica something like 7 or 8 times before I finally got to the point to where, okay, I'm a competent enough coder now to where I can actually build this thing. But if I would have stopped after I failed the first time, this thing never would have existed. So try to avoid that mentality of you're going to get it exactly right. We are still striving for really high quality, but it's the reps that really is going to get us there. At least that's been my experience. The next thing I want to talk about very quickly are Tim Matton and Taylor's comments on the art of deep thinking. And in particular, I want to dig in a little on what Tim Matson said, because I think that there's something really special going on here with his comment that I find super valuable. If I can get that thing to go away so we can just see his comment. Okay. Having some Bluetooth problems today. Too many Bluetooth devices. All right. So let's quickly read this together and then we can discuss it. So this is from Tim Matson. Tim and I have worked together for some time, and he is now at Murley, but before that, we worked together at Intel. At one point, Tim was actually my boss, and I've learned a tremendous amount from Dr. Matson. I find that he has phenomenal insight, and it's great to know that he's watching GTT and sharing some of his thoughts. So Tim says, I love the topic of stuff we learn from old people early in our career. Deep thinking is important for some strange reason. I picked that up as a teenager. The how and why is a long story, not appropriate for this space. I'm actually more curious about that story now. I want to mention a different piece of advice I got early in my career. One of my first jobs after my postdoc was at a company that did contract software engineering in the science and engineering domains. There was an old guy, as in he started coding before I was born. Love it. At the company, who was more productive than any of us young folk. He used deep thinking, but went further. His rule was that code compiled every time. When you submitted code to your compiler, the goal was no compile time errors. So basically, that you would hit compile and it would say everything's perfect. Really, really audacious goal, but love it. It meant that after creating code, he had to sit still and stare at it and make sure it was correct. Then and only then would he compile the code and subject it to his test suite, which he wrote before starting the coding process at all, which is another topic. This is completely different how us young folk write code. We use the compiler as a tool to help us get the syntax right. With an integrated development environment, IDE, we become even sloppier. So deep thought coupled with deep mental compilation and problem definition by creating a test suite, this guy's productivity was amazing. With his mentorship, I made the transition from coder to software engineer. Love it. What I really love about this, and I've spoken about this at least a little bit in the past, which is the goal of trying to do things without becoming over-reliant on tools. Now, this is a bit of a sensitive topic for people because I know some people really love their tools. But I want to share, I think, one of the things that Tim gets at the heart of, which is super important, is different environments will often have different tools. And if your productivity is principally bound by your ability to have access to a suite of tools, then you are likely bound to only the spaces where those tools exist. For example, if you are in the space where you can only write code if you have a compiler, that may seem at the surface like, oh, what's the big deal, Goju? Like, just compile it. What about languages that don't have compilers, like scripted, interpreted languages? No compiler. How would you write code in those cases? Similar things with debuggers. Well, how do you debug code if you don't have a debugger? There's many different ways. One of the ways is to think deeply on these things. There are environments where debuggers are not available. For example, maybe in database systems. There's actually one of my very good friends that's working in this entirely new space of software, hardware co-design. And in this space, they lack infrastructure tools because it's so new. What does that mean? No debugger. So they have to write essentially all of this code without any of the infrastructure support that we have. I would argue that a similar thing is happening or could happen with the vibe coders. Or the vibe coding thing is that if we become so reliant on these things, and this one I think terrifies me a little bit because it's not just that the vibe coding systems are generating the code for us, it's that they have the potential to elide away our ability to think critically. And that's a skill that I believe no matter how advanced our AI systems get, we will likely always need. Uh, I want to roll back to a VOD that I made several months ago, and I was talking about spelling and how I try to uh, be able to write words without a spell checker. And at first glance, this may seem a little silly. This may seem like, well, this is why go through all this effort when you have spell checkers there for you. Where's the spell checker on this? When I'm teaching at the university and I'm writing things on the whiteboard, where's the spell checker there? What about when I'm writing code on the whiteboard? Where's the compiler there? So hopefully you can see how Mattson's comment really resonates with me. And I suspect maybe if you think deeply on this, using even this, that you might realize that this is just in general sort of like a good thing for us to practice. I would argue it applies to almost anything, calculators, uh, your phone, GPS. And again, we've spoken about this, but Tim's bringing this up potentially in like this different light. And I think even those of you who've seen some of the prior episodes, I try also to write code that will just compile without errors. I don't always get it right, but I'm striving toward that. And I think the story that I shared about the spelling is what I'll try to do is that when I misspell a word, I'll still have the spell checker on, but then I'll stare at it and I won't let the spell checker fix it. I'll go back and manually fix it myself until I get the spelling right and it stops squiggling me. So then I can try to memorize this. And again, this may feel like it's overly pedantic, but then imagine that you're yourself gonna do GTT one day, where you need to be able to talk fluidly in front of a whole bunch of people, or you want to be a professor and you have to write things down. What if you're writing a book and you're in some remote area and you want to be able to write it on like a typewriter or something? Like there's a number of reasons why I think avoiding deep reliance on tools is very helpful, that I would encourage all of you to, that may have some resistance, to try to give this one of these considerations where you're being intellectually honest. Going back to that scientific integrity. And what I really mean by this, I just want to clarify, is when we're talking about intellectual honesty or scientific integrity, we're talking about like the directional correctness of something. That is what I'm saying directionally correct? Is this moving to make us better? Or is it moving to make us worse? My hope is that all of you that are being intellectually honest will hopefully see that thinking deeply and avoiding over-reliance on tools are things that will just make us better. It will be hard. Usually what I find is, one of my favorite quotes of all time is this quote of comfort and growth do not coexist. Absolutely love this quote, and I strongly believe that. So along the same lines, oftentimes the things that make us better are painful. They're hard. I went on a run this morning, and I hadn't run in a while, and I was really trying to push myself, and it was hot out. It's a little sleep deprived, and it wasn't as easy as I remember running was just last week. And of course, me being me, I love that. I love that it's hard, and I lean into that. And I would encourage all of you to maybe consider Mattson's comment in the same vein. Is Now, we don't need to go crazy. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't use a compiler or you shouldn't use a debugger or you shouldn't use spell checkers or autocomplete. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying if you maybe get to the point to where you feel as though you are starting to become beholden to external tools to where you really have lost control over your ability to do these things on your own, then maybe find a path forward. Maybe think deeply on it and ponder what the path is. Maybe the path for you is different than me. Maybe it's not a cold turkey thing. Maybe it's a gradual pulling away from this. And it could be in any aspect of your life. For example, it could be related to exercise. Maybe you know deep in your heart of hearts that you have an over reliance on your automobile. And there's times where you could walk to the store or to your friend's house or something like this. But the tool is just so easy. Maybe once a week you walk there and then you try to level yourself up in that capacity when it comes to other things. Maybe you try to do like what Mattson is saying. I think those of you, again, that have seen me code in the past, oftentimes I've jokingly said that all the real coders code in text editors. And part of the reason for that is no compiler. You just like either you know it or you don't. And then just to be clear, this isn't a flex. This isn't like, oh, wow, this is like, you're such a superstar. No. It's meant to help you grow. It's meant to level you up. It's meant to make us better. So then when we don't rely so much on these tools, imagine what the world looks like. Imagine if you could write code where it was just correct. Then maybe the next flight that you're on, that like the one that I was on, where I'm going to India, maybe I'm just writing code the whole time. Likewise, your ability to think critically, moving away from the chatbots, maybe you sit and you just jot notes to yourself. So many of these things they're not meant to show off. They're more meant to help us level up in ways that are really minor, right? Like the whole idea of just trying to write code and write it so well that your hope is you'll get 0 compilers. Well, you're not always going to get this right. But by having that goal, what likely will happen more than not is you will likely become a better coder. You will become more fluid in your ability to code. And then because of that, you will likely be able to express yourself even to other people in an easier way, very much like you would talking to them. You talking to your friend Joe and explaining, well, the code should kind of look like this. And then you say, all right, look, I'll just write it on the board. No compiler on the whiteboard. Same thing with debugger, no debugger on the whiteboard. So hopefully this resonates with at least one of you out there. And again, I love this thinking deeply, and I really enjoy Mattson's comments. And I would love to hear from more of you on various things that you've done. Even if you have other thoughts, you have different thoughts or additional thoughts, chime on in. I'm not the knower of all things, and I'm more just sharing my experiences and the things that I've done that I found to be super helpful. So share thoughts that you have on things that hopefully have been super helpful to you. And in the next episode, what I hope to do is to give a demonstration of how I might do deep thinking in the real world. I'm trying to get the parameters right to where I can show a concrete example. So it's probably not going to be perfect, but again, my hope is that we can do something like directional correctness. like we're doing here. Alrighty. Thanks, everybody, and happy whatever day it is.